this is the ultimate political junkie story of Ken Rudin, and here it is. So it's June 4th, 1968. It's the California primary. The week before, Bobby Kennedy lost to Eugene McCarthy. The first time Kennedy had lost an election. McCarthy beat Kennedy in Oregon. The California primary on June 4th was crucial. But here's what was affecting me the most. I was, back then, fascinated with the Republican Party and the schisms in the Republican Party. And that night was also a primary between in California, between Thomas Kuchel, a liberal Republican who was not a fan of Ronald Reagan, but a liberal, had been around a long time, and Max Rafferty, a right-wing, he was the superintendent of schools of California. Max Rafferty was challenging Thomas Kuchel for the nomination. And I think I cared about that the most because of just, the ideological battles in the Republican Party, in any party, to this day fascinates me. So what I decided to do is I set my alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to know who's going to win, Thomas Kuchel or Max Rafferty. I still remember this to this day. And I turn on my clock radio. I had the alarm set. I wake up because I needed to know. And I hear the person on the radio saying, the senator has been shot. And my first reaction, I still remember this so clearly, I think they shot Thomas Kuchel. I mean, it sounds so bizarrely ridiculous, but that was my first thought. When it occurred to me minutes later, could have even been seconds later, that it was Bobby Kennedy that was shot, I couldn't believe it. It was so incomprehensible that 5 years, 4.5 years after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, that Bobby Kennedy would be shot. It just was. Look, 1968 was a violent year. There was violence in the streets. There were demonstrations about civil rights. There were demonstrations about the war in Vietnam. The country was split. I think that's the crux of why 1968 is so memorable. There was so much tension and so much division. The thought that a Kennedy, whatever you think of him, like him or not, hate him or not, and a lot of people hated him, love him or not, the fact that he was assassinated as he's campaigning for president of the United States was just, again, incomprehensible.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've kept the air on because we've heard an alarming report that Robert Kennedy was shot in that ballroom at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. A very loud noise like a clap of thunder was heard, a small explosion. We waited to see what it was, and then came a report that Senator Robert Kennedy was shot. We will bring you more news as we learn it. So far, that's all the information we have.
And so this was 3 o'clock in the morning. And what I thought of that day was, how long could I stay up before I wake my parents? Because I just had to tell them. I had to tell them. So I sat up, stared at the clock for 3 hours, and finally at 6 a.m. I said, I can't wait any longer. And I remember waking my parents. And I said, I still remember this, Kennedy had been shot. And my mom groggily woke up and said, Bobby, as if, how is this possible?
Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. With Senator Kennedy, at the time of his death, were his wife Ethel, his sisters, Mrs. Stephen Smith, Mrs. Patricia Lawford, brother-in-law, Mr. Stephen Smith, and his sister-in-law, Mrs. John F. Kennedy. He was 42 years old.
And you know something, even so, I mean, it just seemed like, what's the point? I mean, all the stuff that you believe in democracy, you believe in elections, you believe in competition, taking away by an assassin's bullet is just, it's just so heartbreaking. And then every time I think now of that famous speech of Bobby Kennedy declaring victory the night of June 4th, and standing with Ethel, his wife, and other people around him, Jesse Unruh, who was the Speaker of the California State Assembly, who was a big Kennedy supporter. he gives that famous, Bobby Kennedy look with the thumb up and said,
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
and so of course he goes through the kitchen where Sirhan is waiting for him in the hallway to the kitchen. And every time I watch that video, this is 50 years later, every time I watch that video, I say, Bobby, just take a different route. Don't go that way. I feel like somehow history can be changed, and he could just go a different way rather than the easy route to the kitchen through the hallway where he met his death. And I think of that. So nothing seems emotional anymore. Everything, the politics is wretched and it's ugly and I'm sure there was a lot of ugliness. There definitely was a lot of ugliness in 1968, but I don't remember being emotionally moved and touched any year in my life politically as I was in 1968.